anti-communist rioters in the town of Famalicão, northern Portugal, last week. A few days earlier, 2 men died when troops opened fire on a crowd trying to storm the Communist Party headquarters in the town. The crowd had gathered for the funeral of one of the men, and when they heard it had been postponed, they turned on the Communist headquarters again. Though soldiers tried for a while to keep them back, they soon gave up the task, and the building was ransacked by the angry demonstrators. Over the past few weeks, scenes like this have happened with increasing frequency all over Portugal, though especially in the more traditionally minded north, as the country heads towards a clash between the army, backed by the minority Communist Party, and the people. It's a far cry from the heady days of the armed forces takeover in April last year, when the people and the soldiers rejoiced together in the ending of nearly 50 years of right-wing dictatorship. Earlier this year, the armed forces movement and the political parties signed an agreement on the division of power between them. Mário Soares, leader of the Socialist Party and then the country's foreign minister, and communist leader Álvaro Cunhal agreed to put aside their differences of aims and ideology and work together under Premier Vasco Gonçalves. The agreement was supposed to lay the basis for collaboration between politicians and soldiers for several years to come. Since the signing of the agreement, the Socialist Party, led by Soares, has emerged as the country's most popular political grouping. In the voting for a constituent assembly at the end of April, the party won 38% of the votes, with the moderate Popular Democrats winning 26% and the Communists trailing a bad third with 13. But since then, Soares and his colleagues have found that popularity hasn't meant power. Instead of their electoral victory giving them more governmental influence, they've seen the electorally defeated Communists, with the backing of the left wing inside the armed forces movement, steadily increasing their influence. The present troubles began a month ago when the Socialists and the Popular Democrats resigned from the government. They hoped their action would help persuade the armed forces movement to adopt a less extreme line and also permit the parties to play a more active role in determining policy. The government, they felt, was in danger of alienating itself from the people by ignoring the results of the elections and by carrying out changes that were going too far, too fast. Within the armed forces, the two parties did find some support, even at the highest level, where at least one military minister was believed to support them. The focus for the party's dissatisfaction was the country's Prime Minister, General Vasco Gonçalves.
Nós precisamos de facto de uma Constituição e o nosso povo deve pronunciar-se sobre ela.
Though not a member of the Communist Party, Gonçalves had shown signs of becoming more closely identified with their policies, and Soares and his colleagues called openly for his dismissal.
A projetar para a frente as conquistas já obtidas. Não poderíamos ter uma Constituição que não fosse uma Constituição de caráter progressista, que não inserisse as conquistas que já obtivemos em diversos campos, como no campo político, os direitos políticos, etc.
Despite the political tumult, the governing council of the armed forces movement decided not to bow to the socialists' pressure. Instead, in July, a supreme military triumvirate was established, with even the AFM's council being relegated to a mere advisory role. The 3 members were President Francisco da Costa Gomes, General Gonçalves, and the man who was perhaps the most rapidly rising star in the Portuguese political firmament, General Oteo Saraiva de Carvalho. General Carvalho owes much of his importance to his position as head of COPCON, the country's security force, which is in charge of countering any threats to the revolution. Many COPCON soldiers are believed to support the Communist Party or other still more left-wing groupings, and theirs has become a crucial role in the present situation. When Carvalho was appointed a member of the triumvirate, he was out of the country on a visit to Cuba. He returned to a noisy reception from communists and other supporters. He told the waiting crowd he had seen socialism in Cuba and was convinced that any sacrifice was worthwhile. He also said he believed it was becoming increasingly difficult to build socialism by purely peaceful means. We asked how long would the military government last?
Who can say that? Who can say? It's impossible to say 1 month, 2 months, 2 years, 5 years. It's impossible. Only the way of revolution can say that.
Are you happy with the way that the revolution itself has worked out, or are you sad that it should have come to a military government?
No, I'm glad. I'm glad. I think it's a very good solution.
But you won't hedge your bets and say that it's a permanent solution?
Of course not. I think it's not a permanent solution.
Do you think the majority of the people in this country are behind the army and what they've done, the MFA and the triumvirate?
I don't know. Actually, I have my doubts. But we must do something to conquer again all the people.
General, you've only been in the triumvirate a matter of days, but already people are looking to you as the new leader of Portugal. What is your reaction to that? My reaction? Well, I don't want to be a leader. I'm now a leader in the armed forces only because the destiny was that. I never thought about a leadership of myself in the country, of course. But if asked to do so, you would not refuse?
Of course not. It's my duty, I suppose.
Communist Party leader Álvaro Cunhal may not have Carvalho's charisma, but he's believed by many of his opponents to be behind present attempts to drive Portugal still further to the left. Imprisoned, then in exile during the old dictatorship, Cunhal has since worked hard to increase his party's influence with the left wing inside the armed forces movement. With his electoral defeat earlier this year, Cunhal's apparently decided that it's only through the military that his party can achieve power. Though Cunhal and his allies claim to represent popular opinion, many Portuguese are now venturing to disagree. This was a march of Catholics in the country's third largest city, Coimbra, protesting against the seizure of a Catholic radio station in Lisbon by communist workers. The rally itself was peaceful, but in a deeply religious country like Portugal, the Catholic Church is still very powerful, and if roused, devout Catholics could prove a major source of opposition to the communists and to government policies. Much of the unrest in recent days has been in northern Portugal, largely rural, poor, and with a high level of illiteracy. It was from small towns like this that the Popular Democrats gained much of their support during the elections, and the Socialists are also very strong in the region. The Communists exist, but with only a limited amount of popular support, even though they have managed to establish a foothold in the local administration. Now the Communists' opponents are trying to oust them. People like these are now vocally and with violence expressing their opposition to the Communists, and the armed forces now run the risk of becoming involved.
Mas normalmente o povo português tem nível de vida que tem a certeza que vai voltar para trás.
The violence of the anti-communist demonstrations in the north seems out of place in what is essentially a quiet and beautiful countryside. Now is the time of the harvest, and much of the population is heavily involved in gathering in this year's crop, using antiquated methods of harvesting that have been replaced long ago in much of the rest of Europe. The people of this area are hard-working with the traditional attachment of peasant communities to their land and their religion, and it is partly the fear that the communists are seeking to deprive them of land and to undermine religion that has stimulated the demonstrations and protests described by one senior military minister as approaching civil war. We asked one local resident why popular antipathy to the communists was so strong.
I think the main reason is the owners, the small and the medium and everyone's owner. They want to keep the rights of their property. This is most important. They don't want secondary reason. They don't want be conducted by the communists. Inside the plan, inside the planning of all the development in Portugal.
They want
their own rights, and we think in this way they can profit, they can work more and with more profit. They can work more perfectly because they are more interested. They have incentive. They have stimulus to work and to apply their capacities, their capacities to make any development.
They're not rejecting socialism, are they? They're rejecting...
Yeah, they not reject the socialism. They not reject any kind of cooperativism. That's all. The association, they want this association. They know now they have to be associated. I think this is a economic question in itself. Because with the money they get, they can make what they want. And they don't want to be employees. Because if they are employees, even from the state, they don't want, they cannot do what they want. But what they allow to be done.
You mean they're self-employed now? They're their own bosses. They don't want to be somebody else's boss, even the governments.
While Portugal itself is gripped by civil unrest, there's also major trouble in its sole remaining African colony, Angola. Due to achieve independence in November, it's been torn for months by a vicious civil war between two of the three contesting nationalist movements. And there's now a steady flood of white refugees escaping to South Africa or back to Portugal. Over 100,000 are now believed to have fled, while a further 100,000 may try to do so before independence. And a few days ago, the British government advised all its residents in the country to flee, sending a special Royal Air Force plane to evacuate them.
Estado português
In January, Portugal agreed to set up a transitional government in the period before independence, with the participation of the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, headed by Jonas Savimbi, the National Front for the Liberation of Angola, FNLA, and the MPLA, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola. Together with the Portuguese, the three groups agreed to unify their armies and prepare for elections before independence. But almost as soon as the agreement was signed, fighting broke out between the communist-backed MPLA and pro-Western FNLA, which gets most of its help from neighboring Zaire. A summit between the three groups in Kenya in June failed to resolve the dispute, and fighting continues. Much of the fighting's north of the capital, Luanda. This film, shot by a cameraman from Holden Roberto's FNLA, was taken a few days ago in the area the organization controls near the Zaire border. Having lost its foothold in Luanda, the FNLA's regrouped with modern weapons and has announced its intention of driving on the capital and expelling the MPLA. Meanwhile, the third group, UNITA, has stayed out of the fighting as far as possible, though its military forces are on full alert. Several thousand people have been killed, and many more could die before Independence Day. The new wave of fighting has forced thousands of Angolan villagers to leave their homes. The country saw a fierce guerrilla war against the Portuguese from 1961 to 1974. And though the struggle for independence is won, life continues to be disrupted as the parties vie for power. Thousands of people have fled from the combat zones to areas of relative safety, while some people have moved from the towns, causing immense problems for the administration as they try to provide them with food, clothing and shelter, as well as protect them from the savage war raging around them. MPLA and FNLA now seem to have dropped all pretense of being prepared to work together in a newly independent country. And despite attempts by the Portuguese, as well as by the Organization of African Unity to resolve the conflict, it looks like continuing, at least till the Portuguese withdraw in 3 months' time. The Portuguese army has tried hard to keep out of the fighting and has even withdrawn from some of the combat zones to avoid becoming involved. The job, though, has proved virtually impossible, and a few days ago, Portuguese troops opened fire on a threatening crowd of MPLA supporters in Luanda, killing several of them. With tension rising in the capital, there's now a danger that the Portuguese once again will get involved in fighting in Angola, even though they've made it quite plain they have no wish to do so. Decolonization in Portugal's other African colonies, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, Mozambique and Sao Tome, has gone relatively peacefully over the past year or so. But in Angola, it looks like being a bloody process. If it is, it could have a serious impact on Portugal's already weakened economy. Angola's oil, diamonds, iron and coffee were formerly vital to Lisbon, and her economic planners had hoped that good relations with a stable, independent Angola might permit at least some of the benefits from the colony's wealth to continue. At least 50,000 Portuguese have now arrived from Angola home in Portugal, leaving virtually all their belongings behind them, an abrupt and painful end to years of colonial settlement. The influx is now steadily increasing, but those who have left instability and violence overseas return to find that the situation at home is showing signs of becoming almost as uncomfortable, even though violence hasn't occurred on any widespread scale. When the armed forces movement took over power last year, it claimed to have done so in the interests of the people, and one of its posters proclaims its unity with the people. Certainly, in the early days after the coup, there was no doubt that the mass of the people supported the armed forces. But now there are signs that instead of its acting as a sentinel, watching over the people's interests, the movement could be turning into a tough military regime controlling them. Since the formation of the new military triumvirate, there have been allegations from the socialists and others that the country is being turned into a left-wing dictatorship, far removed from the AFM's original ideals. Threats by General Cavallo to lock up all his opponents have done little to increase the confidence of those critical of the current leftward turn. We asked Francisco de Balsamayo, editor of the Independent Expresso, how a left-wing army came to emerge.
I think it comes from before that. First of all, most of the officers have been in Africa in contact with reserve officers, university people who had, on principle, left-wing ideas. Secondly, because when this revolution started, there was a moment of pause. Everybody was, and General Spindler took very much the right-wing position. So there was a reaction of the officers who had did the 25th of April against General Spindler. And then a displacement to the left was very clear. Then, because some parties, and namely the Communist Party, and also extreme left-wing parties, were already and became much more infiltrated in the armed forces, not only among the officers, but also among the sergeants and the soldiers.
This was a deliberate infiltration, not an accidental one.
I think so. All parties, in a way, tried that. Maybe the communists were there before, as always. And apart from that, the appeal of the extreme left-wing movements and parties to the young soldiers and all that was bigger. Then, because after 48 years of one situation, you have normally the opposite. And also because this army is a special army. This army had 13 years of war, of guerrilla war. So you cannot compare it with a normal British army, for instance. It's very different in its way of acting and its spirit too.
If the army were united behind the policies of the triumvirate, there's little doubt it could put down the opposition of the socialists, the popular Democrats, the Catholics and others. In the past few days, though, there have been signs that the armed forces are as divided as the people over the future direction the government should take. These commandos are from the barracks at Amadora near Lisbon, where a group of left-wing officers forced the dismissal of their commander. He was later reinstated at the insistence of his soldiers, despite the scarcely hidden opposition of General Cavallo. Similar splits have begun to emerge in the north, where some army units have stood by and allowed angry crowds to burn communist offices. In the demonstrations at Famalicão, reports spoke of soldiers from the allegedly hardline Copcon cheering as communist-owned cars were destroyed and as the headquarters was wrecked. It's become clear that the government has misjudged the reaction of the people. It may now be too late to change that. In the north of Portugal, the innate conservatism of the people has turned into a virulent anti-communism, as one Famalicão demonstrator explained.
We burn only the property of communists, because in Portugal we don't want communism. Because we have one dictator in Salazar and Caetano, and now we will have another dictator in communists. Now we want democracy, the real democracy.
The situation for Portugal looks bleak. Violence leading to a clear victory for one side or collapse into chaos.